Okay, so today I'm doing my episode 2 of the Starlink, streaming on Starlink while driving to kind of test it. It worked pretty well yesterday, but what was funny is normally what would cause it to crash is, I'm using my mobile data and it just has constant issues. With this, it was working fine, although I only went for like 20 minutes, so it's hard to really judge it. But it crashed because, or I had to end because my battery was going to run out, so I need like this external, what's it called, like a power bank, and so that was running low on battery, and so that'll kind of dictate when these end, rather than it just crashes because my mobile data is kind of shitty. And so hopefully this will work well. And today actually has an interesting way to test it, is the fact that it's raining and it's kind of cloudy, so you would think, that might cause it to work, to have a little worse signal. So we'll kind of see if that affects it. I'm not sure that raining would really affect it, but the fact that it's cloudy, like, it needs a clear path to the sky, right, to work, and that doesn't, you would think clouds would affect that, but so far it seems pretty good. It certainly should be better than the stupid mobile data that I always use, because that's just always horrible. It's like one crash ruins the whole thing, because then it really is distracting to have to worry about that. We just want to get into something here. So, and of course, the rain is going to affect the sound quality too. There's nothing I can really do about that. So yeah, we're going to discuss today. This is maybe one of the first actual debate format discussion episodes I'm going to do, because I've been so distracted by the issues all the time that, like, I'll try to get into a topic and then it just crashes, so I skip it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to discuss, again, from the lens of absolutist philosophy, which I discussed a lot in my debate format. It's basically my, my creation in a way. Not saying similar ideas didn't exist, but like to put it all together. I have a couple of videos on my channel, I guess, that discuss it, but again, that was at a time, this is like 12 years ago now, 12 to 11 years ago, where I did my debate format and all that. So a lot of the ideas I discussed there, and I've kind of discussed offhandedly since then in various forms, but I kind of never really uploaded anything or did it in a formal way. I just kind of did it on a whim. And so, just as a reference point, if you want to understand better what I'm talking about, there isn't really a lot. I have the one channel, The Court of Reason, where I uploaded some of those things, but even that's like a recreation. But whatever, it's the same ideas. So The Court of Reason, I have some videos uploaded there. I made like a Twitter account for it, where I also posted some logical razors there from it. And then I also have a couple videos on my main channels, like uh, taking like a political compass test from an absolutist point of view, right? Things like that. So let me briefly define it, and then I'll go into a particular topic. So basically, absolutist philosophy would be the idea that there are no absolutes, right? Some people get confused by that in the name, that you're thinking, there are absolutes, or everything's absolute, or something. You try to do everything in the absolute sense, like a consistent way, right? You do it fully and consistently, but it's the idea that there are no absolutes, so the only basis of value and measure is a person's potential or action, right, rather than being controlled or held down by some hypothetical absolute. Like, a good example is this. I had this expression that peasants working for the promises of heaven, so this would be like in the feudal times and so forth, right, where the church had a tremendous amount of power. So you'd be like, there'd be the priests and the clergy up in a castle, in the church in a castle, eating very fine meals and wine and all this kind of thing, while the average person is a peasant working in the fields, but they are kept in line by promises of heaven, like, but if you behave good, then God's not going to punish you and he's going to send you to heaven and this and that. So you're a peasant working for the promise of heaven. So a false absolute is being used to control you in this lifetime that you're sure of and exists, instead of some hypothetical, right? It's being used to control you, Whereas if you take that away, now you wouldn't be so tolerant. You would expect something more in this life because you know, well, that's all there is. So what am I holding back for? Right? So that would be used as a tool of control. So an absolute, any absolute like God or again some spirituality or even some of these terms like love or even morality, different things that are posed as though they're somehow above, this state of aboveness or absoluteness, they're used as nothing more than a tool to control you, right? Because otherwise you would think, well, if there's no afterlife, then you're going to hold this life accountable. You're not going to wait. You're not going to hold back. You're not going to, be controlled by promises of heaven or some other dogma. Or if there's no, again, it's a way to appeal to the ego too, like love. Oh, it can't be that society just wants you to be with one person because that's easier to control, even if it goes against natural instinct and different things that people want to do. Oh no, it's the fact that it's easier for society to control and manage and organize, and it's good for the family system, which is at least a functional argument. Right? No, it's not that. Oh, it's just love and it's meant to be and it's your soulmate. Right? That's a way to appeal to the ego and say we're going to bypass your cognitive dissonance that we can't just tell you as society that oh no, we just want to control you. We just want to control your animalistic urges and tendencies and make you like a trained animal, white picket fence kind of a structure that we put you into, right? Oh no, it's not that. It's actually that it's absolute and it's meant to be and it's love and it's so you see how the ego is satisfied by that as a placeholder for actual value, in contrast to the inherent desired suggested tendencies that people may otherwise have. And so what we have here is the ability to consider now through this right an absolutist philosophy. We're going to look at social contrivance. So social contrivance is the process by which self-interest is overextended to a collective and sort of backwards. So, for example, let's look at it from this perspective that the only basis of value that people have and society has in anything is non-basis of self. In other words, self-interest. Right now, that's not necessarily a negative framing as it might seem to come off as. It's more so just an objective observation that the only basis people have, rationally, like the same way that animals would have, etc., the only basis you have is the non-basis of self. Like, in other words, it's not a credible or absolute basis. It's just simply, okay, it's zero-sum self-interest. That's it. Now, some alternate or absolute might be posed, like, oh no, but you're doing it for a good cause, or you're doing it for the greater good, or something like this. The problem with those is, upon closer analysis, they would boil down to nothing more than other people glorifying their own self-interest. So you say, oh, let's glorify the greater good of society, which consists of a collective of people, which consists of individual selves, all pursuing and seeking their own zero-sum self-interest. So it's a way to sort of frame it, right, where you say, well, instead of your zero-sum self-interest, you should focus on other people's zero-sum self-interest, and other people will cheer that on because they feel, well, okay, I'm in a trick. It's like a trick to say, oh, well, suspend your zero-sum self-interest for the collective and for society's zero-sum self-interest. But the only reason why that works is because, oh, well, the other person saying it is also part of that collective. So they believe that, oh, if we make people undermine their own self-interest, it'll benefit us for our self-interest because we're part of the collective. But then by being part of the collective, you're also undermining your own zero-sum self-interest. So you may think it's some sort of complicit agreement that you're saying, well, that's the sacrifice you make, but that's not the framing that's usually used, right? It's usually a way to bypass critical thinking. Again, like the functional argument I was just talking about with the family system. If you want to make that functional argument and do it for that reason, that's fine. But that's not what people do, right? There's an appeal to ego where you say, "Oh no, it's absolute and soulmate. It's meant to be," right? To make it seem like something that you're actually choosing or that you actually want, instead of observe it in the more objective way. And now you'll say, oh no, I'm only doing it because it's easier for society to control and it's a functional basis and it's useful. Not that it's actually any. So in other words, it's interchangeable. I could just be with anybody else for that same reason, right? Under that same criteria, right? So in other words, to specify a process, right? This is what another of my logical razors from here. It's a false absolute to specify or to value something. So in order to be with that one person, or in order to take a process that would be inherent and universal and variable, what you do is you create a false absolute. So now you specify it. Oh, why does it have to be that one person instead of anybody and everybody else? And you create a false absolute. Oh, because it's love and it's meant to be and this and that. Right. So you're appealing to the ego to try to bypass your cognitive dissonance of the inherent desired suggested tendency. And then, which that just means like, you know, let's say the tendency to, be free from that restriction. In other words, oh, I guess I could hold it like at this angle, but like the landscape, not that it really matters. But no, it's a situation where I'm kind of holding it closer because of the rain, because then it may be harder to hear. But no, what you have is the ability to consider that, again, you create a false absolute to specify or to value something that would otherwise be just one interchangeable arbitrary example of a larger process that you could do anything with, right? You could be with anybody else for the same functional basis, and now the defining factor becomes often the nearness postulate, right? Where you say this is a concept that I explained to be that which is nearest to you, which also ties into the non-basic self that I was talking about before. So that which is nearest to you is valued for that reason alone. So it's like, what are these are the two. This is a great kind of way to expose the fallacy. You would say, what are the chances that your absolute love of your life, 1 in 8 billion people, your soulmate, happens to live in the same geographical area as you, happen to go to the same school, happen to work at the same job? These are typically some of the criteria. What are the chances that that absolute 1 in 8 billion person soulmate love of your life happens to meet in that criteria? So it's almost as though that's not the case at all. It's not an absolute. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do that or shouldn't be with them. It means that it's not an absolute process the way the framing and specification would require, because of the simple fact that it's not an absolute. So now it can't be specified from that empirical perspective of, oh, well, you have to be with this one person only, and you're going to try to basically trick and convince yourself and struggle with it yourself, right? Sort of a fallacy of society that's passed on to the individual. It's not society's kind of accountability that is telling you to do something. It's your fault for not adequately overcompensating for that flawed process. That it would say, you have to do this. You have to be with only one person. You have to limit yourself in that way. For example, right? That's not the accountability of society to justify that it's your fault. That, oh, you just haven't found the right one yet, right? Like this emperor has no clothes fallacy. Like, it's absolute until it isn't, and if it's not absolute, then, oh, that's just somehow, oh, you just haven't found the right one yet, supposedly, or which is arbitrary, but it's arbitrary and interchangeable. But even if it was right, you would say, oh, you're going to struggle with it, like struggle to keep up appearances, or to be happy with that, or to everyday struggles. Like, it's absolute, which means there shouldn't be any conflict. But oh no, you have to constantly have conflict to reinforce it and do all these different things. Like, if it was absolute, it would speak for itself and be self-evident and self-fulfilling. But instead, oh no, we have to make all these concessions. we have this absolute relationship and it's soulmate, it's love, it's meant to be, but it requires us to not be friends with the opposite gender because we might be attracted to them, other people of the same gender we're attracted to. It requires us not to be friends with them because, oh no, that might invalidate the process and show how it's not absolute, right? So I call this censoring reality. You have to censor reality and not be friends with 4 billion people potentially, or potentially 8 billion if you're attracted to both genders, which is kind of a joke I made in the past. Like, if you're a guy and you're with a girl, and it's like, oh, now you can't have other female friends because that shows you how absolute and meant to be that relationship is, right? That you have to be so insecure about how supposedly absolute this process is that you have to not be friends with 4 billion people just to make that work or just to feel secure in that. That's a very sound and consistent and absolute process, right? That requires you to censor 4 billion people, censor reality, and say, okay, now it works. Now it's absolute if I create just that framing. So imagine how credible a process is that would require you to do that. So, oh, what if you're bisexual? Oh, now you can't be friends with anybody because you could be attracted to either sex. So now you'll say, oh, in order to be in this relationship, it just requires that you not be friends with 8 billion people. So that's a very logical and credible basis to use. And then let's look at the social contrivance. So one of the key terms there that I would use is uh, that necessary invalid, which means you may think it credible. Now let's go back to just the kind of parent idea that I was talking about. That was just more the stimuli acme, like to do with sexual specification. But let's talk about the overall basis of social contrivance. So what this would mean is that, sorry, I'm having to talk a little bit louder than I should because I'm worried about the sound of the rain. But normally it wouldn't be quite like this. Um, okay, so social contrivance would come back to the idea that, like, you may think that social validation would be credible. So, for example, a mass of people, you can say, oh, how could so many people be wrong? Or if a mass of people does something or believes something, that must give them credibility. However, the problem with that is the simple fact that you could look at it the other way. The fact that something requires social and subjective reinforcement would actually show not only is it not credible, or not necessarily that it's not credible, but that anything by that basis could be validated. So you look throughout human history, this is what I call the stigma effect, or basically just awareness of the nature of a process. The worst thing people can do is view themselves collectively or even individually as credible, because what happens is now it becomes arbitrary. Throughout different periods of human history, people have believed all kinds of things, right? And all other kind of different gods that we would now consider mythology, or in other, if we tribute to the gods, it'll make it rain and it'll water our crops. Like, so all these things that we would ridicule now, so we could look back in history and say, oh, how could anybody possibly have believed that, right? Whatever it was, all the mistakes of the past, the bread and circuses of Rome, how could anybody have let that happen? World War II in Germany, China right now. So you look at it and you say, how could anybody have possibly gone along with that? But yet, in our own time, we view our own state of being as credible. So, God damn, it's hard to talk this loud. I guess maybe if I stop, it'll be better. But the whole point is to do it while I'm driving. Okay, the point is that, again, you view older parts of human history will take their flaws as will ridicule it. How could anybody have believed that or fallen for that? Right? All these different mistakes and fallacies in history that people believed and were passionate about it and were sure of at the time, versus the same things that would be happening today, we might fall for some fallacy too. But we won't see our own, like, oh, it can never happen to us, and how can so many people be wrong? But we would see those of the past and ridicule those, but we wouldn't see those in our own time, right? The ones that apply to us. We wouldn't be self aware and question it. We would indignantly insist upon it and be so sure of ourselves. So that's where, again, people lack credibility. So the same people, not like the literal same, but again, collectively, a collective mass of people could support that one terrible leader in the past, right? You can use whatever example you want that caused all these horrible atrocities and things to happen, right? People were passionate about that. They were sure of themselves about that. And now we look back and we say, how could people have possibly done that? So this leads to the fallacy of specifying the conflict, where I could say, you make it about the individual and you say, oh, well, this person is better than other people of the past. This person is different. That's why it'll work out. But when you make it about that, you leave yourself kind of at the mercy of them, or at the mercy of that specific, like, oh no, but this one's different, or this one will be different, right? So you're relying on that subjective basis instead of the larger process where you say, sort of like checks and balances, where you like assume everybody is going to be potentially bad, right? So now you hold them in check by the nature of the process and the structure, like checks and balances in government, etc. Instead of focusing on the specifics, so you would say, you know, instead of relying on, oh no, this one individual is going to be better than those of the past, or this one's different and unique and they're going to be a saint and this and that. Instead of relying on that, you would instead say, no, we're going to assume the worst of everybody and say, okay, no matter who they are, we're never going to give them total power. We're going to hold them in check. We're going to be skeptical and cynical about everybody. So it doesn't come down to the individual and their specifics and their performative aspects and their, you know, kind of the cult of personality basis that is often used. And so again, there's a lack in credibility where throughout human history, you should hold this as a skepticism of yourself and of others and of people in general, right? If people can be fooled into believing that in all kind of other, traditions and rituals and different things that we would now consider ridiculous, right? That the earth could be flat or that, even some people still believe that, but, that the earth could be flat or that, again, the sun revolves around the earth instead of the other way around, or that, again, that if we tribute to the gods, it'll make it rain, and all these different things. It shows you that people can believe just about anything, so they're not credible at all. And so we should be very skeptical of that. So right now, in this era of human history, there's other fallacies that you're being controlled by right now, but that you would take for granted and never question. Meanwhile, you would ridicule all of those same mistakes that people have made in the past, all the things that people have believed and been controlled by, right? But um, now you would believe the ones that control you in your era, and 100 years from now, people would look back and say, "Oh, look how stupid that was. How could you have possibly fallen for that?" So you don't see your own fallacies, but you see those of the past, right? So you have to hold a certain stigma effect of history, like think about all the mistakes, all the fallacies, all the different things people have done and allowed to happen. Shouldn't you be a little more skeptical and careful about yourself and your own, kind of flawed, myopic, limited nature, your limited senses, your limited perceptions, all the different tendencies that you can be controlled by, right? Shouldn't you be a little more skeptical right? That the human being is myopic. Your senses are flawed and limited and can be easily manipulated. And again, we've seen the proof of that throughout all of human history, that it doesn't take much to deceive people. So again, you should be very skeptical. And so when you get to the collective contrivance state, what happens is you, again, seeking validation from arbitrary subjective people in that same way is very questionable, because again, not only is it not necessarily credible, it could be the opposite. The fact that, it could be like a peer pressure argument, or it could be like a collective issue here where, again, a mass of people could have believed any fantastical thing of the past, right? Any ritual, any other dogma, any other fairy tale, what we would consider today, right? So all these different things that a mass of people have believed, you would say the same thing. Well, a mass of people couldn't have been wrong, right? That many people couldn't have been wrong. So you would say the same thing in the current day. Well, millions of people can't be wrong. So all it would take to validate something is for millions of people to be fooled or tricked into believing it, or to have some incentive to believe it, etc. So that shows you how it's not credible, because again, it's arbitrary and interchangeable. So if those same millions of people turned around and supported something else tomorrow, you would say the same thing. Oh, I guess they're right about that. So you're not realizing the subjective nature of people, that they can be very fickle, they can be very myopic, they can be very subjective. So it's not necessarily credible. It's arbitrary, it's subjective, it's interchangeable. And so what happens is that you have the ability to consider that, again, the fact that social validation would be necessary of something would be invalidated by the fact that, well, that's arbitrary. Then they could apply that same thing to anything. And throughout history, you would see it has, or throughout different parts of the world, you would see people believe all kinds of things that you might disagree with. So, or even let's use it on a popularity basis, like, Taylor Swift might be really popular, and whether you like or dislike her, whatever, that doesn't mean that she's the best musician ever, or right now, or compared to others, right? Just because something is popular doesn't necessarily mean it has some justifiable basis of standard in meritocracy, or some measurable way, right? And so what happens is, again, popularity and quality are two separate things. You can measure it by some other standard, or you have again, quality, or again, just anything can be popular. It can be arbitrary. It can be subjective. It can just be defined by what people are exposed to. Like the mainstream media could control that, right? It's kind of an overlap there. Like, just because you might genuinely like something, right? Like, okay, you genuinely like Taylor Swift or some big mainstream artist. It doesn't mean you don't like them, but it means that you've been exposed to them, maybe through the mainstream, and you haven't been exposed to other things. So imagine if you were exposed to every single artist equally, and then you decide for yourself which one you like best. It's very unlikely you would like the mainstream one. Then you might think, oh, well, there's some social Darwinism that goes into it. Like, well, there's a reason why you're exposed to them more than others, but you should always be able to make that choice for yourself, instead of, again, the mass of people mostly just reacting. Like, they'll say, well, we're already exposed to this, this, and this, so now we choose between those things that you've been exposed to, like choosing between what's already been chosen for you. Um, Now you seem to make a choice, but you're only choosing between the mainstream things that you're exposed to and that have basically been chosen for you already. Right, like choosing between two major political parties or something like that. And then you also have the ability to consider that, again, exposure, repetition. You might say, well, that's social Darwinism, the fact that somebody, something would be exposed more or popular more in the public eye, such that you would be exposed to it. But the problem with that is it doesn't mean that, like the way it comes about could be maybe like a lowest common denominator. So it appeals to the most number of people for such and such reason. Doesn't mean it's a high quality standard accountability, right? You could argue some degree of social Darwinism there, like, well, there's a reason why that's exposed to so many people as opposed to something else. But it could be as simple as, you know, it could be nepotism, like, oh, they have connections in the industry, or it could be, uh, again, the media just likes them and the media is pushing them, or they have certain relations that way, like certainly uh, something that's not politically incorrect, that would be kept out. So there's certain criteria that would be favored or not favored based on that, right? Certain things are going to get more exposure than others. So you could argue there's some level of social Darwinism and quality that goes into it. The reason why is that person popular as opposed to somebody else? But it's not an absolute. Again, it's arbitrary. It's subjective. So you shouldn't treat yourself or other people as necessarily too credible. It's very easy to trick people. You can see throughout human history that is the case. You should always be skeptical. There's always a method of control that's being used on you and on others, right? And so you won't see the one that you're falling for right now, or that's considered normal in this era of human history, but you would see all those of the past. And so now a little skepticism is validated in that. And so let's look at another topic here where, or just getting back to that point, that necessary and valid. So, like, again, it's not only that social, a kind of a mass group collective is not necessarily validating, because again, it's arbitrary. We can see that with anybody. All it takes is, for people to be fooled or tricked or sort of deceived, or again, just lowest common denominator exposure, etc. Just again, throughout history, you could look at, well, a mass of people was also responsible for supporting this dictator or this other leader, or all kind of things that we would question. So maybe they weren't so credible. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they could be fooled. Maybe you have all these flaws. So you should be aware of that actively as we go forward. But also, you understand that you understand that so you would use that, oh, well, collective validation, this many people can't be wrong. Not only is that not a credible basis, as we've just explored, it might even be the opposite. You say, well, the only reason why you're doing something or valuing something is because of a peer pressure or because of some preconceived basis already established. So if you take that away and you assess it on its own merits now you might not do it, or now it would be no better than anything else, or various other things. So now you apply the same basis to, oh, well, how could this many people be wrong? Or, you use that as a crutch. So you say, oh, because a mass of arbitrary subjective people value this, therefore it must be validated and credible. But that becomes very interchangeable. So, oh, if that same mass of people happen to value something else, you would just mindlessly go along with it. You're not really holding it accountable to any criteria, right? You're just assuming it. You're just going along with it. You could look at this from the fallacy of tradition, for example. Let's use this for Halloween right now. People dressing up, and doing these different things that often, the traditions of an era take on the form of its what I call the machination process, basically the net sum of technology and an era. So, like in the modern era, you would see a very commercialized version of something, right? So, like, oh, Christmas is all about giving presents and this and that. It would be like that because, right, of the modern era that you live in, which has nothing to do necessarily with anything. So the problem is that there's two fallacies when it comes to tradition, that you would have the preconceived thing that, oh, you just do it just because it's already established. So if it wasn't established, you wouldn't do it. Or if something else was established, you would just mindlessly do that too. Right? There's no other necessary criteria to it. So just something being established makes it credible. Something not being established makes it not credible. So it's like this default fallacy that you go for where you would believe that, oh, things are the way they are because that's the way they're meant to be. Right? That's a logical razor I would use quite a bit. Or it would be like um, the credibility aspect of the credibility aspect of you know like, okay, things are the way they are because that's the way they're meant to be, or like, okay, things are the way they are because that's the way they're meant to be. But that's a default fallacy because, again, so if things were a different way, then that would be right, or if things weren't this way, that would be okay. So you're going just with a preconceived notion. You're not really using any criteria to assess it or hold it accountable. You're simply saying that I love that the rain is trying to troll me. I tried to solve one problem with the internet. Now we get this, but that's okay. Part of it has to do with the speed that you're driving, but not really. Like, even if I stop, you'll still hear it to some extent. Um, hmm. But no, you have the ability to consider that, again, this sort of default preconceived fallacy. So if anything has been established for a long period of time, you'll just mindlessly go along with it and not question it. Then you might think, well, there must be a reason why. But the reason could be arbitrary, right? It could be, well, oftentimes set by an absolutist action. Like, somebody does something and then people just go along with it. That doesn't mean that's the best thing or is especially credible. It just means that, okay, people happen to go along with it. So, and then you go along with it because, oh, well, it's already established. And then people in the future go along with it because, oh, well, it's been established. So it could be something as arbitrary as that. So this is a good sort of anti-fallacy that I use, where if you knew or saw or witnessed the origin of something, you often wouldn't take it that seriously. So, for example, if you if you saw how something came to be, now you wouldn't be so willing to take it seriously. It would just be like anything else. So a good example is like if I introduce a new idea to you right now, if I say, "Oh, you should do this," or let's come up with our own holiday, November the 16th, and on November the 16th, we all walk around naked. It's the nudist colony day, right? And everybody walks around naked in society, and we see what that's like. Be a minimalist for a day, right? And you would say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." You're going to question it. You're going to ridicule it. But for other traditions, you just mindlessly accept them. If you go back to their origin, you might. Most people, again, either you don't know the origin of it exactly, just sort of vaguely, or not at all, but you just mindlessly do it anyway, or you you if you did know the origin fully, you would realize, okay, it has nothing to do with this, or it's just arbitrary, it's just random. So why are we placing any special emphasis on it? You could just make your own holiday any different day. It's completely arbitrary. So that's the fallacy of tradition or preconception, that you would accept it just because it's already established, or you would again accept fucking when I now I can talk quieter because I'm stopped for a second. It messes up your whole voice and diction here. So now we have, yeah, I guess when you're stopped, it really isn't as much of an issue, right? It won't be as loud, the rain and stuff. So what I can do here is let me. I love how I'm just always being sabotaged by something. It's amazing. So hang on. Like, could I mute it and then like order something from a drive-through and then continue, even as oh I'm a minimalist, I shouldn't be doing that. But no, okay, let me try to get a few of these points out though, because it's not so much distracting driving, but it's distracting with the whole volume and the rain and everything like that. And so, okay, and I kind of want to test this and listen back to it and stuff like that. So like let me see how this would work. So one of the points I was talking about was the fact that again the arbitrary established tradition fallacy. You go along with something just because it's established, and but if you knew the origin of how something came to be, oh, it was established because some random person one day randomly decided to just do something, right? Somebody like it would be as arbitrary. Oh, I came up with this idea, November the 16th. Let's just go. Everybody is naked, and we're a nudist colony, and we'll try that, right? It's just oh, and then if people go along with it, then oh, you'll do it in the future just because oh, look, it was established. So we give too much credibility and credence to something being preconceived or established because that's meaningless. You have to go back and account for okay, why was it established? How was it established? On what basis, on what reason. So you'll realize, oh, it's just arbitrary and we're just doing it just because. And so it could just easily have been anything else if instead of that, oh, instead of dressing up, it could have been some other tradition. Oh, this day we all walk backwards, or we do everything, upside down, or it would be just as arbitrary as introducing a new idea like that. But for a new idea, you would hold it accountable and critically think about it. You would question it, right? If a new idea is introduced to you, you would question it. But if something is already preconceived, you just mindlessly accept it, right? So the arbitrary and the specifics of it don't really matter. And then you also have the ability to consider that um, again, the origin point is a great accountability example. If you saw how something came to be, you might question it. Oh, some sweaty random dude in his basement came up with this idea, right? That's why history gets like a free pass. We just kind of forget about it. We just take it for granted. If you saw how something came to be, you would critically think and question it and hold it accountable. And it's not so much that you individually might not accept it, but it wouldn't be like this mass accepted thing that everybody just goes along with because you realize, oh, some random dude just came up with this. Oh, that's how everything came to be. So I'm a random dude, or you're a random dude. So you come up with something. There you go. It's just as credible, or not, as something else, right? So it's the power of preconception that something arbitrary is accepted just because, and then we just go along with it on a social pressure, contrivance, like preconceived basis. And so it's a situation where you're able to let's see, let me do one more concept here. Like again, tradition, the origin point, the fallacy. If you saw how it came to be, it's arbitrary. You take it for granted. You don't think about it. You don't question it. Bypass your critical thinking. Whereas again, if any new tradition or new idea was introduced to you, you would question that. You would say, "Oh, well, why should we do that?" But you don't do that with anything else. With something preconceived, you would ask the opposite. You would say, "Why shouldn't we do that?" Or, "Oh, stop being a contrarian. Why don't you just go along with this thing that's been established?" Right? Never mind how it became established. Never mind that most people, again, wouldn't even know how it became established. Never mind how different it might be in its current form than what would have been established originally. Never mind that it would have just been arbitrary, subjective, some person just doing something, coming up with it at random, right? Never mind any of that. It would just be the power, again, not of credibility, but rather bypassing credibility. It's similar to how people are in youth when you raise children and when you're indoctrinated, right, at a young age. Why is that credible or why does that work, right? It's because people are too young to think for themselves, and they're kind of subject and just they're kind of subject to it. They're kind of dependent on it financially, at a young age. And so that works not because, oh, that proves that society is credible in the specific state and the things you believe and, take for granted, right? Oh, that proves that they're validated. But not only does it not prove that they're validated, but under that same condition, you could do almost anything because, oh, you're financially dependent and reliant on your parents at a young age and you can't fend for yourself. So now you're subject to the indoctrination there because it's tied to your survival. So not only does that not validate it, but that seems like, well, that's actually arbitrary and an unsound basis because you're kind of using that. I call it sort of the starving out basis, the fallacy, where society will try to do that too. Like, oh, if it wants to ostracize you, right, it doesn't prove that it's right. It just proves that, oh, we're going to try to put your livelihood at risk, get you fired from your job or, you know, again, ostracize you. That doesn't prove that it's right. That just proves that it has power over you through empirical authority and like empirical authority and monopoly over means. Like, oh, we're gonna take over all the, you know, nature and everything. Like, is everything is owned by some company or by the government or somebody. So now you can't live outside of it. So you rely on it, right? And so again, it's credibility from a way that actually bypasses any standard or criteria from the perspective that, there's no accountability. It's just, oh, if you don't agree with China, and again, it doesn't have to be a government argument. Let's just use that as an analogy. If you live in China, you have to go along with certain things, right, that you might question and in the government. And if you don't, they'll starve you out. Right now, you might get fired from your job, or you might get arrested, or you might get ostracized, or something like this. So that must mean that they're right because, oh, you know, that validates them and people will go along with it. But again, that's arbitrary. You can do that with any government or any society ever. It's the same thing in your own society that regardless what it is, you go along with certain things just because, or because you'd be punished. You'd be punished if you don't, right? Or again, somehow held accountable to that. So it's like a functional basis fallacy. So what happens with that is, well, it may be functional to do that. It may be necessary or useful in your society to do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's validated by any sort of standard or criteria that you would actually have. It's more just that, okay, this is what's already established, so you have to go along with it just because it's established. Otherwise, you'll get ostracized by it, right? But that's arbitrary and changes over time. So again, in World War II Germany, there might have been certain things you have to go along with, and if you don't, oh, you're just a contrarian, or oh, stop trying to be so entitled, or oh, you know, just just go along with it. Just it's the default, right? Don't question it. This is necessary for society. If you don't do this, you know, you have to do this to make a living, right? Even if some of that, right, is doing something. It's like a functional argument that you would say, oh, you have to do this in order to make a living and to survive, right, in society. you may have to do it, but that doesn't mean it's validated in doing it. Like, again, it's not tied to function. You say, oh, you have to defer to some empirical authority structure, but that could be arbitrary and interchangeable, or, the function that you're doing is not tied to that empirical authority, because again, you could do that same function without it, or you could have a different empirical authority structure and do it in the name of that. So these are two separate things, right? But you see, again, power structure tried to take monopoly over means, or try to specify itself to that. So like it takes ownership over that almost. And so I want to do is I want to kind of keep this going, but take a little break and see if that will work, or I kind of want to listen back and stuff. And so let me see how I can do this. All I would have to do is like mute the mic. I could even just use this as my AFK screen. What if I just mute my mic on here somehow? I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say. That was a bit disorganized, even more than normal. But again, the core idea is a mass of people can support anything and have supported various things we would question, atrocious throughout history, etc. Right? Doesn't mean it makes them credible, and it could even be the fact that a mass collective mob mentality of support of something is the fact that it's necessary kind of invalidates it in a way, because not that they're wrong, but that's the basis to rely on. Oh, so just it's like peer pressure in an extreme degree. Oh, everyone in society, or like again, a mass of people in society support something or passionately do something, and if you don't agree, they'll kind of ostracize you or come after you. Is that really a form of validation? That's not arguing from a standard, saying, "Oh no, this should be done for this reason. It's productive, it's functional, it has this standard or basis or criteria behind it." Or is it the fact that is it the fact that it's not a functional basis? It's actually again just a mass basis. Oh, this many people do it, and if you don't do it, those people will come after you, or again ostracize you or ridicule you. So again, by that basis, it's arbitrary. It could be anything, because again, a mass of people is just doing something, right? You're not assessing it. So you're saying, why do you do this thing? Because everyone else does it. And why does everyone else do it? Because everyone else does it. And why did they do it in the first place? Because of some origin point that they're not even aware of, or that they're not actively holding accountable, and is sort of mystified or glorified, when if you were there to witness it, it would just be some arbitrary subjective person coming up with some arbitrary subjective thing that then people would arbitrarily do, and then you just continue on, right? Is it like some absolute empirical basis that, oh no, we do this thing for this absolute reason that can't be questioned as universal, or is it ultimately just arbitrary and subjective, and now it just becomes the degree of tradition or repetition, exposure, repetition, reinforcement, right, like that. And so again, it's an interchangeable basis. It's subjective. It's arbitrary. So again, social or collective validation would be questioned there, because what it comes back down to is the fact that um, again, it could apply to anything. It's applied to many things that you would question right throughout history. So it's an unsound process, right? The way that a conclusion is come to should not be, oh, we're just going to do it through peer pressure or something like that. So let's use one final thought experiment here, right? You would say somebody, the celebrity or social figure, has a great following and a lot of people behind them, so that makes them right. And this other person is just some random person, and so that makes them wrong. Now, or like everything again, if everything a famous person says is right because look at the following that they have and support and attention that they get, or everything some ordinary person says is wrong because look, they're just some random person, and nobody knows who they are, right? But then that can apply to anything. So again, if a famous mathematician says 1 plus 1 is 4, they must be right. Neil deGrasse Tyson or somebody considered very smart says something like that. 1 plus 1 is 4, so they must be right. Or if an ordinary person says, 1 plus 1 is 2, they must be wrong, right? If we're applying the cult of personality empirical basis, right, that would validate them. So you would have a mass of people behind them versus a lack of that. Again, that example might be too extreme, but a lot of other things you would have credibility just for that reason alone. Even if it's in that field, even if it's relevant to what you're saying, it still doesn't automatically make you right. So this is one of my other logical razors here. This one I think I put up on Twitter more so, but on that stupid the court of reason Twitter. But I say that credibility, or your your credibility or achievement, if you're like very experienced in a field, your credibility is why we hand you the microphone, right, like up on stage, and why we listen to you, but it doesn't obligate us to listen or to agree. So in other words, right, you could be up on stage because you're famous and successful in a field, but now when we actually listen to what you say, now you can't use your stature as an argument, right? It's why you have the platform, but it doesn't make the argument for you. So if we question you and you say, "Oh, but I'm this experienced astrophysicist, so you can't question me on the subject," but and you're just some random person, but then that again, that means you could never be wrong about anything. Anytime you're arguing of experience, not of actual merit of the conversation. So you would say, again, this person is right about everything, especially to do with the subject because of their experience, and this other person, random person, is wrong about everything to do with that subject just because they don't have that experience. The problem with that is a very internal and basic fallacy because what you're doing is you're saying that you're not actually holding the ideas themselves accountable. So now, again, the reason why you're up on stage or why you're famous or why people are listening to you is because of your experience and credibility potentially. But then once you have that, now you're still accountable to it rather than validated by it. So it's not that, oh, everything you say is right and credible because of your stature. It's the opposite. It's that everything should be held accountable, or maybe not even because of that, but it would be held accountable the same way, right? So it's not a free pass. So again, pretend somebody famous in a particular field is up on stage and they're talking to somebody who's not famous or debating somebody who's just a random person. But now you have to look at each individual idea and claim right on its own for credibility instead of saying, oh no, everything the experienced person says is right and everything the inexperienced person says supposedly is wrong just because of that. Right, rather than no, now we look at the ideas themselves and hold them accountable and treat them, do a credibility test on them, right? Rather than again, so don't use in your argument up there now. We give you the mic, we listen to you, you're up on stage, you're famous, you're listened to because of your experience and credibility. But now what you say should be held accountable instead of, oh no, well what they said is right just because of their credibility and stature. How can you question them? Who are you to question them? Instead of let's look at the actual idea. Does it make sense what they're saying or not? They can still be wrong. Somebody else can still be right. You know, every like the don't focus on the idea, not the individual. Right. So that ends up being some very common fallacy because otherwise, then they're always right about everything, no matter what, and somebody else is always wrong no matter what. But again, an idea is just anybody can just do that, right? So, Albert Einstein says 1 plus 1 is 4, so I guess he must be right. That seems like too literal of an interpretation. Like, oh, of course that would never happen. But again, on other more nuanced things, right? Especially if it's not something so measurable, and if it is measurable, then again, it doesn't come down to the individual anyway. But no, it's like you have like the again, like a measurable thing would speak for itself. So then you don't need the individual, or even if it's from a credibility standpoint, does it really matter? Because again, the idea should speak for itself. So just because that person happens to be experienced in that field doesn't really matter, right? Like if the idea is good, then okay, fine. If anybody else has had that same idea, then it's just a reflection of some objective, validated, logical basis of value, right? So it's the idea that we focus on, right? The fact that, again, that person given the opportunity to be in a position of mass reverence like that is fine, but again, focus on the idea, not the individual. Um, but again, yeah, a mass can support anything, so it's arbitrary, subjective. You should hold it accountable to actual standard criteria. Don't just use some default preconceived basis to say, well, this thing is famous, so therefore that makes it right. So let me try to take a minute here, and I just want to see like how long I can do this for, or so we've gone from like 80% battery to 50% battery, and how long? How long have I been going for? We've gone for about an hour. So that means I could probably do like 2 to 3 hours on this at max. So even if I wanted to do it for a longer time or like all day, I couldn't because this battery would run out. Um, so that is unfortunate. So let me try to mute it and do something here. Like if I'm talking, okay, so it shows the Bluetooth icon next to the microphone, but I can't tell whether it's using that or not because I always have like the Bluetooth headphone on. Like, what if I put that away? Let me turn that off. So now is it using the phone mic? That's so weird if it would do that automatically because I use that like as a headphone.